Hi, I'm Kelvin Chin, Life After Life expert and meditation teacher. You're watching P3 on Rise Above TV.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Rise Above TV, where we are empowering humanity and supporting unity. You're watching P3, the place where we feature individuals who tapped into their power, passion, and purpose. I'm your host, Janie Terrazas, and today I am super grateful and very excited to be sitting with the radical Kelvin Chin. He's a life after life expert and a meditation teacher, an author. He's written a couple of books. I can't wait to hear what this guy has to say about power, passion, and purpose. Kelvin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Great to be here, Janie.
You know, I met you, we said it was like, was it 3.5, 4 years ago already or something crazy like that?
Yeah, 4.5 years.
Yes, we met through a great guy named Scott Goyette through an organization called Go Love Now. And you had come to Austin to teach us and take us through the type of meditation you teach people to do. And it was such a powerful experience. And it was really great because he was so gracious. He let us stay the night there at the house. And man, we stayed up drinking tea, chatting it up and talking about all kinds of really cool things about life and about God and love. And it was such a pleasant experience. You had left such an awesome impression on me. And so the fact that we are getting to sit here and talk today is awesome. So thanks again for being with us. So where would you like to start, man?
Well, we could start anywhere. I mean, you mentioned the meditation. So I've been meditating since I was 19 years old. As you know, I've gotten into spiritual stuff, but that was later, a few years later. When I first got into meditation, I got into it because I was really stressed out. So I was very highly anxious. That's why I was looking for something. And I stumbled into a meditation lecture and I learned to meditate. But a few years later, I started having past life memories. And then about 15 years later, I started communicating with the other side spontaneously. All of that stuff happened spontaneously. So the spiritual side opened up, but initially I got into meditation because I was just a stress monkey. And so I needed help. But it's been a long time teaching. I've been teaching since, the early 1970s. And helping people worldwide. That's my passion. My power is all about being balanced. That's how I look at power. Talk about power, passion, and purpose. For me, obviously, it's helping people in terms of purpose. But I think each of us needs to find our own purpose in life. And to me, what that means is what makes us happy. So, that's unique to every individual. And it's a work in progress, I think. People wonder, well, do I have a soul plan? And did I come in with a life purpose and blah, blah, blah? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I mean, some people are very thoughtful and they think way ahead. They're strategic thinkers. You have to ask yourself, are you a strategic thinker or not? If you're not, you may not have come in with a life purpose, and that's okay. But
Yes.
You can always create one. And even if you did come in with one, it may have changed as your life has progressed. So people should never feel like, oh, well, I don't know what my life purpose is. And now I'm stuck. No, you're never stuck. Life is an eternal journey. Change what you want to change,
Exactly. I love that you mentioned that idea of like they feel stuck, and it was sounding like you were kind of describing like an individual when they feel lost, because they feel like they don't have a sense of purpose or direction. But even taking purpose just simply back to, we really are here to remember and return to our organic, natural essence of love. And we live in a world where so much of what we're taught and what we're told and what we're always being shown is so the opposite of that. We have so much fear inside of us. And then we're responding and reacting to life from this space versus love and faith and reassurance, so getting to that space is not easy, but realizing that as you do any kind of healing work on yourself, that is a very purposeful thing to be doing. And I love how that you also mentioned the fact that you went into it because you were really anxious. And so many people deal with stress and anxiety. And I know we mentioned you wrote a couple of books, and one of the books that you wrote had to do with death and being able to handle death in a way that's like with grace, and that gives you a sense of peace even though there's pain. And I believe it was your mother that you had lost, so I'm just kind of curious,
Right.
all that anxiety and the meditation, how long were you into that when your mom died?
For me, it was very personal. My mom died in 1982. I was in my third year of law school. And I was very, very close to my mom. And it was the first person who I was really, really close to who died. I mean, my grandparents had died, older people, they're already 90 years old or 95 years old. They've lived a full life and so forth. But my mom, I was really close with, and she died in her 50s. So I was young, she was young. It was a shock to everybody. And that's really what shook me in terms of grief and grieving and emotional. Really was traumatic for me emotionally. But to answer your question, I'd already been meditating for 12 years at the time. I'd already taught 1,000 people to meditate at that point. So I was an experienced meditator and teacher of meditation. But my mom was my mom, so I would sit and cry. And you've heard me tell this story to you personally. I would sit and cry in my meditation sometimes, and it was a release. And I tell my students that to not fight that, to not resist these emotional or mental experiences you may have in meditation. It's incorrect to fight and resist those experiences. We need to let them out. And for me, it was very cathartic, but it also propelled me into helping other people with death and dying issues, because I had to deal with my own stuff. And so I started helping other people, was that 35, 40, almost 40 years ago now. That's what got me inspired in starting that nonprofit and writing the book and so forth, and helping other people around the world. Now 60 countries, I'm up to 60 countries helping people.
Congratulations. I believe it's called Overcoming the Fear of Death. And
Right.
you really share, like you said, your personal story, and then you offer people tools, ways of, I guess, perspective, right?
Yeah,
Ways of looking at things.
Yeah, because it's a non-religious approach to looking at death and dying. So I look at it from all different perspectives that really are the perspectives that underlie all the religions. So I don't get into all the religious stuff, but if you read the book, the 4 belief systems that I talk about are really belief systems that everybody has about death and dying. Now they may funnel that and filter that through their religious beliefs, or whether they have religious beliefs or not. But there's underlying beliefs, and I talk about it from that perspective.
I really like that about you too, in that you're able to address things from this universality, and you are able to, I would imagine with just about any concept, be able to look at it from a lot of subjective points of view and still be able to look at it objectively. And I think that really is another part of empowerment, I think, right? Is being able to respect all of these differences and then find the similarities so that there could be some sort of unity and cohesiveness in the medicine that could help us.
Yeah, absolutely. Because life to me is about balance. You want to talk about power? For me, power is balance in it. And you're talking about a balanced way of looking at things. And I've aspired to look at things in this more balanced way for many thousands of years. My memories go back 6,000 years so far of different past lives and so forth. And so and I've had lifetimes as a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a Native American, indigenous belief system, etc. So I mean, pretty much the whole spectrum of the major religious spiritual perspectives. I've looked through those lenses through many lifetimes, and so I can see things, and I can see and relate to why somebody of one of those traditions may look at things through their lens a certain way. But I can also look through a different lens from my own personal experience and memories as well. And so I've worked on that for a long time. And that's just not just with spiritual stuff, but with just life in general, how to look at things, as you say.
Yes. I feel like, one, it helps to have a healthier relationship. I call it real relationship with thyself, because it's like trying to cut to the truth and seeing a lot of different things, right? But aside from the relationship with self, which is the most important one, it also helps with communication and being able to relate to others, which is really awesome, because when you have that level of open-mindedness, that balance, harmony, we'll say, then it's easier to connect with a lot more people, because you're not limiting yourself in your experiences while you're going through life. And that too is, I feel, a very powerful thing to be able to experience.
Yeah, I mean, at our core, we are all very, very similar. We all have different personalities, 8 billion of us humans on planet Earth, and then how many animals are there? You know, we all have different personalities, but at our core, we have a similar set, you could say, of desires, needs, and so forth. How we express those is unique to each individual. But if we understand that there's more similarity among us than the dissimilarities, I think that brings a certain level of not just community, but for me, once I had that real visceral, not an intellectual, but a visceral internal realization of that, it brings a humility, I think, to oneself, and a level of acceptance of others that for me personally wasn't there. Maybe this happened to me 20, 25 years ago or something like that. A big component to that was free will and understanding the principle and what free will really means. And a lot of people understand the words, but they really don't understand the concept fully. And it's simply that it's not complicated. It's free will means personal choice. But the problem most people have is they think, well, I have personal choice. Okay, great. But they forget that there's like 8 billion other human beings who also have personal choice on planet Earth. And they may be directly or indirectly, very indirectly in some cases, affecting us. But, you know, like I don't know the people in Congress, but they're affecting me. And I don't know the people in some, country on the other, 12,000 miles away on the other side of the planet who haven't fixed their engine, and they're spewing incredible fumes from their car, but they're affecting me indirectly. There's a lot of free will choices that people don't take into account. Well, not that we can, but we need to understand that there's a lot more free will choices out there than just ours. And then when we understand that and accept that, for me personally, it affected me. I relaxed.
It's so true. You touched on humility, and acceptance, and in the word right now, when you said relax, and it's like, we actually could, I'm sure people that are watching could like feel that. That's why I wanted to take a breath. It's like, yeah, because we're so uptight about our differences. And so when we're able to absolve that, it's a beautiful thing. And you also said, and I'm so glad you said it, you were talking about intellectually knowing things, right? You can know these concepts, but until you really have like visceral experiences to feel what needs to be felt so that it becomes embodied. I always say knowledge is power, but until it's embodied, then it becomes wisdom. Or how are you using this in your day-to-day life? And I think that's where people struggle a lot in this experience.
Here's the thing. So one of my early teachers, Jesus said, his definition of love was, accept the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. So it's a view of love that's acceptance. It's not the romantic view of love, although the romantic view of love is included in his definition of love, accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. So that understanding of love includes the idea that of not changing them. You're not trying to change them into something that they don't want to be. Now, does that mean that you have to accept their bad behavior that may be pushed on you? No, that you're accepting them for who they are, not trying to make them something other than who they are. They have to do that. That's a self-teaching that only each of us can do if we each want to do that. Not everybody wants to, like you said. And so that's their choice. So accepting them without trying to change them when they don't want to be changed, that's love. Now, if somebody wants help, what do? I help people. But they're coming to me because they have perceived a need for help. They've come to me or to you or some other teacher for help. That's different. I view that as we can influence others. And so it's not this idea of passivity that, oh, we just got to sit back because everybody has free will and we can't control anybody, blah, blah, blah. It's true you can't control anybody, but you can influence people. I don't consider that controlling. So controlling to me is trying to make them what they don't want to be.
Yes, it's like, I'm sorry, it's like a form of manipulation, basically. There's a difference. It's all about intention, right? And the agreement that the two people have.
That's right. There has to be at least an implicit agreement. So for example, specific example, like I just taught a young teenager to meditate because very high anxiety. The mother reached out to me, found me on the internet to help her daughter. Okay, I have to have a conversation with both of them to make sure that, because it's, first of all, it's a minor and so forth, that the mom or one of the parents knows and agrees to this, but also that the child, I said to the mom, look, the child has to at least be curious, if not want to do it, but at least curious. You cannot force, I will not teach the student or your child as a student of mine if they don't want to do it. So that's the thing. If we approach life from that standpoint, I think we have our own more inner peace within ourselves, and there's more peace within that other person, as you say, because they don't feel rejected, as you said, by us.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a very important part of that process, which you were talking about in terms of guidance and coaching and really creating the safe space. You know, the person has to have, like you said, at the very minimum, it starts with the curiosity. And if that gets fired up enough, it kind of turns on this like fire of desire. And it's like this whole like process, you know, that a person goes through when it comes to self-awareness and really helping themselves from the inside. And I also like that you teach people how to be their own inner teacher, inner coach, because ultimately we all are here to help ourselves. And it's just, we do need to be humble enough, going back to humility, to recognize when maybe we need some guidance and some support. I appreciate you touching on that. I also wanted to go back to, we can find ourselves getting stuck in partnerships, relationships, friendships, business partnerships, where, going back to balance, the scales are not quite even. The level of respect and ability to hold space for each other in a safe way is not, the other person's not able to do that. And we need to be able to recognize that, because that causes us a lot of stress.
Yeah, so there's several essays. This is a collection of 67 essays that I've written. The book is called Marcus Aurelius Updated, 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. And it's really a collection of 67 essays on exactly what you just said. And there are probably 6 or 8 out of the 67 is, I don't know, maybe 10 essays or something like that on what you just talked about, which is this idea of, we'll call it bad behavior. I talk about it as cruelty, and transcending, how do we deal with cruelty and bad behavior that exists in our lives, those kind of challenges. How do we live a life of love and forgiveness in a situation where the other person or people involved may not be so loving towards us? So I talk about that in several of the essays, and again I come back to Jesus's definition of love as accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. And then the idea of forgiveness is not giving people a hall pass. That's a mistaken definition, the way a lot of people view forgiveness. I look at forgiveness, and he looked at forgiveness as moving forward. So how do we move forward in our lives in a way that we stay as whole, WHOLE, as possible, and yet move forward with or without that relationship? So the relationship doesn't necessarily have to continue. If it's a really, really bad relationship, then we may need to sever that, but we're still in a state of loving and forgiveness of the person or people, because we are not there to try to change them into something else. That's the definition of love. And forgiveness, move forward if we need to. And as you just said, self-love means also accepting ourselves for who we are and not who we wish we were, not the ideal image necessarily, holding ourselves out for that of ourselves or others. We need to accept our warts, I say, also the stuff we don't like. That's part of who we are at that moment. And we are on an eternal journey, which means there is no beginning and no end, contrary to what Woody Allen said in his joke. He said, eternity is a really long time, especially near the end. But no, there is no end. There is no end. But the point is that relax. We all have plenty of time to figure stuff out. Now, that doesn't mean to sit on our butt and do nothing now, but we don't need to be frenetic. We have a lot of time when there's no end to time if we're eternal. And I think our souls are eternal. So
yes, I agree with you that piece, the light, right? The piece of energy, that electricity that's allowing our hearts to beat right now, that's not something that can be divided and or cut and or turned off. They say energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred, transmuted, right? Yeah. Or whatever. So that's why they say, we are soul, but there's a piece of that spirit, energy, electricity that is dwelling within the body. And Jesus talks about that. It's like God and the kingdom of heaven, I believe, unless I'm messing the words up here, but yeah. There's always this direction about going within. And that was another thing that you and I had in common, was that one of my greatest teachers when it comes to mastering unconditional love is Jesus. That was what felt like was coming through to really help me kind of see past the cloak and the veil that's been put onto his message, because there's so much fear because of shame and guilt and judgment. And that's one of the reasons why he came, was to kind of rectify that. And that's why they killed him, because they were like, hey, you can't be telling everybody that they got God in them. You know what I mean?
The Jewish priests the Jewish priests, the reality is that the Jewish priests got jealous about somebody coming in and taking away their power base, which really was their tax base, which is really their money.
Right.
And then Pontius Pilate didn't want to have anything to do with it, because he was posted in Judea, which he considered the backwater of the Roman Empire, in the desert, and he didn't want to be there. His wife didn't want to be there. And so he said, you guys do it with him what you want. I don't want any trouble here, because he didn't want any Rome to be perceive him as an unable governor unable to govern. So that's the reality. Look, Jesus didn't die on the cross for anybody's sins. Paul created that. So we'll just get that right out of the way. Paul created that, and if your preacher hasn't told you that, then look it up in the history books by religious historians who have read the ancient Greek original Bible documents from the original versions of the Bible, because it was a piecemeal thing that was pulled together. They've read, the religious historians have read the original ancient Greek manuscripts written by many dozens of people that we now call the Bible. So you can't read the Bible that's in that's in the bookshelves or in your church or whatever, because that one's been sanitized. But the original ones that the religious historians have read make it very, very clear that this was created by Paul, the whole notion of Jesus dying on the cross for sins. Now, there is stuff in the Bible that is accurate based on memories that many of us have had, including yourself. And so there is stuff there, but the notion that he died for everybody has created more suffering in the world, unfortunately, than it's an unfortunate thing. But my memories of Jesus, hit the notion of seeking the kingdom of heaven within is a real notion. And the seeking of the kingdom of heaven within is our own mind. but not the way most people think of their mind. They think of their mind as, this analogy, I sometimes talk about that 8-inch plastic bucket part of our mind, which is our waking state part of our mind, which is good. It's important when we're driving a car down the street, but it's not important when you're sleeping or when you're meditating or when you want the mind to experience the expansiveness of itself. Then that's what he meant when he said, seek the kingdom of heaven within, close one's eyes, and one can experience the vastness of one's own individual mind. That's a connection with ourselves that we largely as a human race have lost. And so he was reminding us of that. That's what I teach when I teach meditation.
Yes, that's one thing that I wanted you to touch on. And I appreciate too the connection in that Jesus was teaching this. And
right.
You have a very unique, well, I'll have you describe what meditation is, and then the type of meditation that you teach, because that's what was really powerful. People think, oh, I got to get the mind to quiet down. And if you practice this long enough, then you'll have less thoughts floating through when you go and set the intention to go into that space. But before then, there's a lot that's going to be happening. So feel free to share what you'd like about that.
Yeah, the nutshell version is that I teach a technique where you don't focus, you don't try to clear the mind of thoughts, you don't resist whatever the mind is experiencing. So there's no clearing of the mind, there's no focus, concentration, focusing on the breath, there's none of that. The more we focus on the breath or focus on this or focus on that, the more we are limiting the mind. We are not allowing expansion of the mind, we are restricting the mind. By definition, that is a controlling, a directing approach to the mind. And whereas what does the mind really want to do? The mind wanders and it goes here and there. Everybody experiences that. But the part of that wandering of the mind that people don't realize or don't, see right off the bat is that the mind does wander in search of satisfaction. And by turning the mind within, which is why I call what I teach the meditation I teach, I call it turning within. We turn the mind within, the mind starts to turn within more because the mind likes that, it finds it satisfying. But the key is how to turn the mind within and then what to do when the mind goes here and there without focusing. That's the key. And so I teach the technique of how to handle whatever is happening without controlling what is happening. And so that's where the rubber meets the road, is learning how to do that in a way that's allowing but not restricting or controlling or directing. And there's a specific technique involved, but that's the nutshell version of it, And then what happens is you get out of the 8-inch plastic bucket part of your mind, you start experiencing naturally, without control, the vastness of one's mind, and all this, the power, passion, and purpose starts to fall into place because you're so much, you start to realize that you individually are so much bigger and more powerful inwardly than you realized.
Yes, it's like going into the biggerness of thyself, right? And
that's the kingdom of heaven within.
Right.
The other thing is, once one learns how to do this, what we're talking about, the technique, as one continues to do it, you kind of implied or alluded to this earlier, Janie, is that eventually it becomes so natural that then you just close your eyes and it automatically happens. But you cannot start there, because you start there and your mind is just going on like that. What do you do with that? You need to learn how to, a technique that's as easy and effortless as possible. The easier and more effortless it is, the faster it gets you to
nirvana. The other thing I wanted to mention, because you did mention breath, and I know that we talk a lot about breath work and stuff like that on some of the other episodes, and a breath is something that allows us to put our nervous system into rest and digest. It's part of like how we can, the somatic responses, there is an empowering aspect to being able to understand what breath is and how to use it. But I do understand what you mean by, for some people, just focusing on the breath, you see that as a form of a limitation to some degree for some. So it's not like you're opposed to breath work and you understand it.
I teach some immediate kind of relief type of techniques also, in addition to the meditation that I teach.
Awesome.
And it involves breathing, but not controlling the breathing, but it does involve some breathing.
Okay.
We can stimulate the vagus nerve through some breath work. The issue is not whether you do it or not do it. The issue is any technique like that will have some positive effect, may have some positive effect, but it will be temporary.
Right.
It's not changing the structure. What I teach changes the structure of how we experience life. Now, if you think about those words, it's not about changing experience. It's not changing it does change how you feel, but it doesn't change how you feel by changing how you feel. That's manipulation. But changing the structure of our experience, that changes our life.
Yes.
And so the breath work can have an effect, and it will have an immediate effect, but as long as it's related to the physical biological body, the effect is going to be limited to obviously the physical biological body. The other part of that is that I have people who come to me and say they've tried this breathfulness and breath work and this and that, and they can't because they're afraid. They have breathing issues that trigger their fears. So that's a whole separate category of people who cannot benefit from anything, even immediate effect from any or temporary effect from anything like that. So the thing is that the more a technique does not involve the physical body, the more abstract and powerfully inward the experience and results can be. There are different techniques, and probably I would say 99%, there may be 1% that's not so helpful, but I will lean towards the very generous and say that 99% of the techniques out there are probably helping people in some regard. And so I don't want to throw water on any technique out there, but we can look at techniques as in a spectrum. And my general principle, I guess you would call it, is that the easier and the more effortless, it's a double negative, but the less effort and the easier the technique, the more it's aligning with the natural tendency of the mind and creation, if you want to look at it very broadly, universally, of expansion. And the more restrictive the technique, the more going against the current it's going to be moving. And so my logic tells me, as the philosopher part of me says, why not move in the direction of expansion with my technique as well, rather than concentrate, focus. Because to me, that's an application of what I call waking state rules in meditation. And I say to some people sometimes, I say, well, why would, if an alien came to planet Earth who had never slept, and they came from a planet just like Earth, and they had all these trees and buildings and cars and everything, but they got into about 30 car accidents going to Trader Joe's every day, and that was the norm. It wasn't a big deal. The insurance companies loved it, and they paid huge premiums, but it was just normal that they paid, like half their income in an insurance premium, because they could never figure out how to not get in a car accident because they never slept. They come to planet Earth and you teach them to sleep. What would you tell them? Okay, you lie in this thing we call a bed, you put your head in this thing we call a pillow. And if you told them waking state rules to teach them to sleep, they would never get to sleep. Focus on relaxing, relax. Move your energy down to your feet, move your energy up to your head, focus, concentrate, and do all this stuff. The person would never fall asleep. And yet there are many meditation techniques out there that do exactly that. And I get it. It might make people feel somewhat more relaxed. I'm not throwing complete water on the fire there. The passion, will say, for somebody who may be passionate about teaching that, that's okay. But think about it in terms of the principle of expansion. Does it align one's mind more with the principle of expansion or less? I use an analogy like There's a current in the river. Why fight the current? Go with the current. And when we go with the current of life, or in the case of our individual mind, go with the current of our individual mind, our thoughts and emotions, where they're going, and not fighting it, then we can faster experience the expansion and the peacefulness that comes along with the contentment that comes inwardly along with that expansion experience that meditation can initiate. And the anxiety reduces and releases, and the balancing and the brain chemistry. You know, I was in a test subject in the first medical studies done in the United States in 1970, 1971.
Yeah, for transcendental meditation, if I'm not mistaken.
When I first learned, exactly, when I first learned TM, and I studied personally with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in 1971 and 1973, and I was an international leader with his organization for 10 years. So it's a great organization, and they went off in a different direction, and I said, okay, I'm going to keep doing the meditation. I didn't want to get into all this other stuff that they get into, but I've made it easier, and I've removed all the cultural trappings. That's why I can teach anybody in the world from any religion and any culture now. But the point is that if we align ourselves more with the natural tendency of the mind as he taught it, as being, oh, satisfaction, oh, turning within. I retranslated it to call it turning within. But then there's less fighting of the current. We're going with the current in the stream. The technique can be easy.
Yes, and a big part of it, I meant to say this earlier, and I'm so glad it came to my mind right now, is the non-judgmental aspect. We were talking about acceptance and allowance of just kind of like what's coming through, and having that compassion. It's like, as you're doing this form of meditation that you take people through, it's expanding that part of themselves, which is great, because it's almost like a Mr. Miyagi way of helping yourself, so that when you go out throughout your day, you'll start noticing, oh, a little more patience, a little more compassion for this person.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's two things that people get conflated and confused. They confuse the two. You see what you see. You may not like what you see, but you can still have a relatively neutral emotional response to it. I can see something I don't like. It can bother me, but the neutral response isn't that I'm not bothered. Sometimes it is, I'm not bothered. But the way I think of neutrality is more, I'm not overwhelmed by the experience. So, example, I just went to my uncle's funeral. It's a very sad experience. You think I'm not sad? My uncle died. I was very close to him. I would hang out with them a lot. And I was like, almost a surrogate to them in a certain way. I was very close to my aunt and uncle. He died. And I go to the funeral. Am I sad? Yes. I'm emotionally experiencing grief and sadness at his funeral. There's 200 people there, and yet I am not overwhelmed by my emotional experience. To me, that's what I mean by when I say neutral. I'm not, if that neutral doesn't mean I'm a robot. Neutral doesn't mean I'm not sad at my uncle's funeral. To me, in that sense, in that context, neutrality means my inner contentment is intact.
I literally just posted something about that this morning.
It has to come from within, and the within has to start with expanding ourselves, our conscious capacity. And so another analogy I use is we're all like ocean liner with a big deck, and there's 100 or 200 deck chairs on it. The deck chairs are like our thoughts and emotions, and some of the patterns of the way we think and emote are maybe broken. So some of the deck chairs are broken. They may need to be fixed and so forth. And most people's approach is to move around the deck chairs, to rearrange the deck chairs, and that's fine. It can have an effect, but I would say that wouldn't it be more effective if we could expand the size of the deck? And that's what I teach people to do. That's the expansion of our conscious capacity, of our experience, of our mind. We expand our consciousness, then we can move around the deck chairs much more easily and get rid of the broken ones more easily. And so back to your point about Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius studied Stoicism, and one of the things that I mention in my book is that the view of the way we now view Stoicism is actually incorrect or not complete, we'll say. And they were not robotic, and they were not saying not emote. He talked a lot about emotions and so forth and so on. The issue is not that emotions are bad. The issue is that we should not allow our emotions to rule us. We need to have balance. And we come back to the power point of balance in life between our emotions and our rational, logical thinking mind. It's not one or against the other. They're not good and bad. They're both. And I would argue that every thought that I have is full of rational and emotion. It's both. It's not, I don't have emotion thoughts and then, oh, now I'm gonna have a rational thought. My mind is a fluid, and I think everybody's minds, if you think about it, is fluid, and every thought we have has various degrees of emotion in it. We don't have an emotion mind and a rational mind. That's an easy way to talk about it in a psychology class, because you can test you on it on an exam, and it can be an A, B, C, D, E answer, but it's not reality. And so Marcus taught balance. That's what he taught himself about. His original writings that they found in around 800 AD, and somebody published them, I think, in the 16 or 1700s, and they called it Marcus Aurelius Meditations. They were just reflections that he wrote about himself to himself. They were personal notes to himself. And so all of that is filtered through this idea of balance between the emotions and the rational mind. My opinion of observing the world is that it's more a disconnect and a lack of clarity of logic. What people say is logical and rational thinking, there is so much cognitive dissonance in the thinking. And the other thing is the other aspect emotionally is it's not just about being emotional, and it's not saying that emotions are lacking. It's that desires are unclear, and and people are not clear about what the desires are, and then they're even less clear on how to manifest the desire, what they want to have happen in their lives. So the lack of clarity to me in the emotions and what they purport to be logical thinking is really where the rubber meets the road. And so what we need to do is help people, is to educate people, and this is what I do in my classes, as I point out red flags where the thinking is going awry. And if this thinking is starting to go a little bit this way, by the time you get 500 miles or 5 miles down that way, that thinking has gone way off the rails. And so what I'm doing in all of my teaching is try to help people think more clearly, because if they can think more clearly, it's going to align the desires more clearly with creating a happier, more inwardly contented life, and externally manifested happier life as well. But we are so ill-equipped in terms of how to think clearly that is, I think, the key missing element in the human race, if I had to distill it to one thing.
It's that confusion. And that's what I love so much too about the work that you do, is that you're helping. That confusion is also like inflammation. You know what I mean? And so you're helping people with their mindset, and at the same time helping them get healthier, because when you have a healthy mind, the mind and body are working hand in hand with each other.
I tell my students that my goal with each of them is to help them think more clearly, because if they can think more clearly, their emotions and desires are going to be more effective in creating a happier life. If they forget all the content from all of the classes, my afterlife series, I talk about what happens after we die, my meditation class, if they forget all the content, but when they die and they move on, if their mind is able to think a little bit more clearly without so much dissonance just means inconsistent thinking, then I have set them up for lifetimes of a happier lifetime, 100, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 years from now, because I've helped them change the structure of their own mind and how it thinks.
Yes, like leaving a legacy of wellness so that
Exactly.
they can continue to build upon that.
So here's the thing. People should understand also that I give a free phone session, or if they live in other parts of the world, a WhatsApp session or a Zoom session, free for anybody in the world who wants to talk to me about anything that we've discussed, any of the topics, any of the areas. They have a question, whatever, about any of the areas that we've discussed. It's part of my nonprofit mission to help people worldwide, regardless of culture, religions, no religion, can be atheists, agnostics, it does not matter. And by the way, just as a quick aside, you don't have to believe in God for you to experience the afterlife. The afterlife is a reality. It's not based on anybody's belief system. In the same way, you don't have to believe that you're going to wake up in the morning when you go to sleep at night. It just functionally happens because it's part of the structure of reality when you have a physical biological body, is that eventually you will wake up in this thing that we call waking state. It does not require your belief to be awake. And in the same way, when we die, you don't have to believe in God, a creator, source, nature. I mean, fill in the blank, whatever synonym people like to use these days. There is no structural belief system that's required in order for people to experience the eternity of their soul. The eternity of the soul, in my opinion, is something that everybody experiences regardless. In my opinion, I say the opinion is the eternity part, because obviously I don't have experience with eternity. You can't experience eternity. But my logic tells me, based on my 6,000 years of memories, and then that experience plus my logic tells me that our souls are eternal, not created, not destroyed. As we said, energy cannot be created or nor destroyed. First law of thermodynamics. So anyway, feel free to reach out to me anytime. kelvinchin.org. You can just Google my name, probably is the easiest way to find me, and you'll find all my 4 websites that way. And
I love it.
YouTube also.
Oh, YouTube. Yes, for sure. There's so much content that's available to us to help us along our transformational journey. And I highly recommend those of you that are already into meditation or looking to start meditation or going through loss, because, he helps people with grief. And when it comes to death, it's not always the death of a loved one, it's a death of a relationship or a death like a career or a job coming to an end. And so in that sense, the 5 stages of grief are kind of the same, and he can help you through that process. On the flip side, right, there's the grief and then there's joy, and you kept bringing up the word happiness. As we wrap up this beautiful conversation, what would you like to say about joy, or what are some of the things for you that are like your non-negotiables, or like really practical ways that you make sure that you create your joy?
Well, I think the non-negotiables for me is me taking care of myself. That's non-negotiable. So I help people around the world, and people say, well, you're helping so many people. How can you do? Well, I carve time out for myself. So, and that's non-negotiable. So that means my meditation every day, to getting enough sleep, watching some fun movies, but also for me, the physical, and that I work out regularly every day. I swim 3 days a week. I do some machines at a studio once a week, and then I power walk the other 3 days. So I work out every day physically. So my non-negotiable is taking care of my physical biological body, and that means eating and hydrating, drinking enough water, hanging out with good people who supportive. I think we all need to do that. But so meditation is a key component, but it's not just meditating every day. It's taking care of my physical, biological mechanism here and keeping it healthy. And then I guess non-negotiable is the choices that I make. So I naturally choose things that are going to be helpful for me and for others. Now, for some people, that's difficult. And so for some of my clients, they struggle with that because of different things in their upbringing and the way their personality is structured and their psychology is structured and so forth. But for me, those are the non-negotiables, is taking care of myself and being patient. And this is a work in progress for all of us, being patient with others, loved ones, and just people generally in the world. Those are the big takeaways that after all these decades on planet Earth, this lifetime, that I've come to learn about myself.
Thank you. You already let everybody know how they can get to you. Any last little words on peace or patience?
I would just say that to remember that point about free will, that we all have free will and personal choice to make choices in our lives, and also to marry that up with the concept of that there is no such thing as perfection. Do not hold yourself to a state of perfection, a standard of perfection, that we all are a work in progress. We're all figuring things out. And if we have eternity, that means we never, ever, ever figure, nobody figures it out, because we're always figuring out, there's always more and more and more to figure out. We never, ever can fully know ourselves completely, that we're always figuring things out. So to be gentle with oneself is the point. Be gentle with oneself. Don't hold oneself to a state of perfection, and don't hold others to that state of perfection either. And respect the free will choices that people make, and love ourselves means that boundaries, as you said, Janie, earlier, may sometimes be very appropriate to draw in certain situations. Choose to be uplifting and not hurtful as much as humanly possible. And why is it better to be less hurtful to others? Why? It's because it's good for ourselves. So that self-love includes all of those ideas. It makes us feel better to be around people who are feeling better about themselves, doesn't it?
Yes, I always say how your being impacts your well-being. How you're being to yourself, towards yourself, and to others is impacting our well-being. And so this is a time of accountability and responsibility. And the more individuals that can get on board with that way of being and that way of life, the better all of us are going to be, right? Because going back to unity and community, we really are one big familia, brotherhood, sisterhood, and we have to return to that remembrance. We want to put that civil back in civilization, right?
Stability, yeah.
Yeah, stability for sure. Thank you again, Kelvin. I wish you many blessings on all of your endeavors.
Yes, great to see you again, Janie. Take care.
Great to see you. And thank you everyone for supporting the mindfulness movement here at Rise Above TV. Your likes, shares, and follows are greatly appreciated because they help spread the love. Subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels for more mindful content. Tune in next week to meet another individual who's tapped into their power, passion, and purpose. Till next time, peace be in us.